In 2012, former IRS Commissioner Douglas Shulman flat out denied any targeting was taking place.
Absolutely no targeting. This is the kind of back and forth that happens when people apply for 501c4 status.
Well, a year later, he changed his tune, forced to admit that targeting had taken place and fessing up to knowing about it long before the scandal made headlines.
What I knew was there was a list. I did know that Tea Party was on it. I didn't know what else was on the list. I had a partial set of facts.
In March of this year, the new IRS commissioner promised to hand over all of Lois Lerner's emails. Remember, she's the woman at the heart of this scandal.
Are you or are you not going to provide this committee all of Lois Lerner's emails?
We are already starting that process. Yes, we will do that.
It was a promise the IRS repeated over and over again until we found out that her hard drive crashed and emails from a crucial time frame had mysteriously vanished into thin air.
The first time I knew that emails had been lost from her account was in April.
So he found it out in April, but Congress and the American people did not find out until last month. And then we were told, the computer crashed and there definitely were no backups to Ms. Lerner's hard drive.
We confirmed that backup tapes from 2011 no longer existed because they have been recycled pursuant to the IRS normal policy.
We confirmed it. They confirmed no backup tapes until, yeah, you guessed it. Suddenly we found out this month, maybe they do have backup tapes.
Right now, the question is, do I know anything more about tapes, backup tapes? And the answer is I don't know any more, other than that the IG is investigating whether there are backup tapes and whether they're in fact recoverable.
What? What do you mean he's investigating whether there are some? You just said under oath that there aren't, that they do not exist. So what are we to make of all of this? J. Christian Adams is a former Justice Department attorney and legal editor of PJ Media. Chris, this is the head of the tax agency asking us to trust him and vouching for Lois Lerner as he is either terribly informed or worse.
It's becoming the Beltway clown show, Megan. Look, lie after lie, flip after flop. That's what's characterized this IRS scandal. Don't forget, there's a lot more. We had it was a low-level employee in Cincinnati, lie. We had Lois Lerner flip and flop over the Fifth Amendment before Congress. But perhaps the biggest flop of all, Megan, is the President of the United States. Because President Obama, a year ago, said he was angry. He read the Inspector General report. He was furious about it. He's going to get to the bottom of it. Fast forward to 2013. There's not a smidgen of corruption. That's what's going on with this scandal, is complete, dishonest, lying, flip-flopping, like a bunch of rogues who don't think there's any accountability.
You've asked us to believe that your very special experts couldn't save one piece of data from this drive, or one just like it, correct?
That's what I was advised, yes.
The American people don't believe that. You realize that it's the idea that we can recover the last 17 or 18 seconds from Challenger exploding above our atmosphere, falling to the sea and being left under the sea for a year, that we could recover the voice from that, makes people wonder why a product that simply came in and out of the office with Lois Lerner every day, suddenly not one piece of data could be recovered.
That's Congressman Darrell Issa grilling IRS Commissioner John Koskinen on Capitol Hill this week. At the same hearing, Koskinen also testified that investigators have found backup tapes in the Lois Lerner email probe. So those lost emails may not be so lost after all. How are we going to find out what is the real truth here? Who is going to be the person who is responsible for going in and saying, yes, we have them, or no, we don't? Or are we going to have to rely on the word of the IRS again? And we'll be back here 6 months later saying, oh, sorry, can't find them again.
That is the billion-dollar question. Here's the problem. So, as I said, it looks as though this is coming out of a Treasury Inspector General investigation. He is not obliged to make public anything he does until he puts together a report. Now, he has told a judge here that he's got 11 people working on this investigation, but this is all happening behind the scenes. Meanwhile, the IRS is using that special Inspector General investigation as an excuse to not tell Congress things, saying, look, we don't want to mess with the Inspector General's investigation. So, now the other question is whether or not you shouldn't have a court appoint a forensic investigator to look at this.
Let me ask you that. There are some civil lawsuits that are going, moving forward, separate from these probes that you were talking about. And judges have asked the IRS to explain the missing emails. Judge Reggie Walton, for example, in Washington, does he have the capacity to appoint, say, a forensic expert who could go in and do his own investigation of what happened?
He absolutely does, and in fact, that's the question that's facing him right now. Last Friday, the IRS filed a declaration with him, giving him a bit of bland information about the history, supposedly, of what happened to the tapes and to the hard drive. He now has to decide whether or not that answer is adequate and whether or not he wants to appoint a forensic investigator. Let's hope he does, Paul, because I think that that's going to be one of the only ways we actually get some public information about what's happening at the IRS.
So here you have the tax agency of the United States, Dan, which is responsible for handling confidential tax records, and they can't keep track of the most basic email hard drives. I mean, something wrong with this picture?
Something is tremendously wrong with this picture, Paul. I mean, just set aside the issue of the investigation of the conservative groups. I think to the average American taxpayer, the question here is whether the Internal Revenue Service, which, as you say, Clay said, is guilty of frightening incompetence. I mean, incompetence is just mind-boggling to anybody who works in the private workplace, or whether something more malign is going on here. And Kim suggests the only way we're going to find out is if Judge Walton appoints an independent forensics expert to get into that agency and find out what their problems. It cannot go on like this.
This is the administration that claimed it would be the most transparent in history. And we've got disappearing hard drives and missing emails everywhere. It's not just the IRS. You know, Congress was also told recently they're looking into, for instance, the EPA. And a guy who is central to their EPA investigation, they're looking into the Pebble Mine veto.
In Alaska.
In Alaska.
Yeah, right.
And one of the guys who they're most interested in, who seems to have encouraged the agency, the EPA, to take this route, guess what? His hard drive crashed too.
We confirmed that backup tapes from 2011 no longer existed because they have been recycled. Do you know who said that?
Sounds like me.
It is you.
The backup tapes may in fact exist.
I have no information as to whether there's anything usable on those tapes.
Why didn't you tell us the IRS had destroyed emails that belonged to Lois Lerner? Why didn't you tell us that?
First of all, emails for Ms. Lerner may or may not have been lost. They were not destroyed as a conscious effort by the IRS.
Breaking tonight, the IRS claimed under oath that its targeting of conservatives was never politically motivated. But tonight we have learned that the woman at the heart of the scandal, well, we now know what she really thinks about Republicans. Earlier today, the House Ways and Means Committee releasing an eye-opening string of emails from Lois Lerner. Emails that lawmakers believe show her dislike of conservatives. We do not know who was on the other end of these emails because that information has been redacted. But the lengthy back and forth took place days after President Obama's re-election in 2012 and gives us new insight into Ms. Lerner's mindset. At one point, the person on the other end of the email exchange writes to Ms. Lerner saying, quote, well, you should hear the wacko wing of the GOP, and goes on to say it's time to hunker down, buy ammo and food, and prepare for the end. The right-wing radio shows are scary to listen to. To this, Lerner responds, great. Maybe if we are through, it's because there are many blank holes, she says. Joining me now, Ohio Congressman Jim Jordan, who's been out in front of the IRS investigation, a Republican and member of the House Judiciary and Oversight Committees, and he just took part in a hearing on the IRS today. Congressman, thank you for being here. And so she goes on to call GOP radio hosts crazies who will, quote, take us down, and refers to them as blank holes, as I pointed out. And yet, let me just, before I get you to respond, take you back to then acting IRS Commissioner Stephen Miller in 2013 and what he had to say about what was and was not at play in the IRS's targeting.
The concept of political motivation here, I did not agree with that in May. I do not agree with that now. We were not politically motivated in targeting conservative groups.
Your thoughts?
Oh, it's just flat out wrong. I mean, the scorecard's 104-7. 104 conservative Tea Party groups were targeted, some of them for years, harassed, asked all kinds of crazy questions. 7 progressive groups were put on a list, but it was a different list. All of them received their C4 status. So the scorecard's 104-7, and the 7 were all approved. The 104, most of them weren't, and some of them had to wait years. And then we have the email that you referenced, Megan, from Lois Lerner, who's in an agency that's supposed to be nonpartisan, not bipartisan, nonpartisan, and yet she calls conservatives crazies, terrorists, wackos, and obscene, obscene names.
Right.
So, yeah, every day in this investigation, we learn something new. When we depose people, we learn something that contradicts Commissioner Koskinen's testimony. When we get new emails, we learn something new.
The evidence about Lois Lerner's partisanship continues to mount. Now, we know that she was coordinating with the Department of Justice, trying to help them with respect to potential criminal charges against regular American groups that were right-leaning based on what she thought was too much political activity. And then we also found out a man named Al Salvi out of the state of Illinois, who had run for the Senate seat now held by Dick Durbin, who is a Democrat. So this Al Salvi did not win this race. The Democrat Dick Durbin did. He talked to me about how when he was running, Lois Lerner, was heading up the Federal Election Commission and went after him full bore on charges that were never substantiated and repeatedly thrown out. And that when she finally gave up because she couldn't make the case, she tried to extract a promise from him. Listen to what he said.
She asked me to get out of politics for the rest of my life. I asked her, Lois, would you put that in writing? And she said no.
So, Congressman Jordan, let me ask you, if we now have proof positive that this woman is a partisan, that she did have ill motivations at heart, whether they in fact motivated her behavior, we can only surmise, but wouldn't it be nice to have somebody look into it?
Well, yeah, and exactly. And the evidence keeps pointing in that direction. What we do know, Megan, and you referenced this, is that Lois Lerner was working with the Justice Department clear back in 2010 and gave them 21 discs of information about C4 organizations, 1.1 million pages of information about C4 organizations. Some of that, a small bit of that, had confidential donor information, but the IRS gave that to the Justice Department. The FBI had that file for 4 years. And then you get the testimony that you got from Mr. Salvi. It all points to this was, and maybe, and this is why we're looking into it, some coordinated effort to go after people for, again, exercising your most fundamental right, your right to speak out in a political fashion, in a political nature against your government. And that was targeted by this administration.
Developing tonight, new calls for a special prosecutor days after we learned about expletive-laden emails from the woman at the heart of the IRS targeting scandal. In those messages, Lois Lerner appears to refer to some conservatives in disparaging terms, including calling them blank holes. Her comment leading to a fiery exchange between South Carolina Congressman Trey Gowdy and a Democratic witness, a law professor, who tried to convince Congress that a special prosecutor is not needed.
Professor Tiefer, would you seat a juror who referred to your client as an obscene body part?
I'm sorry.
Would you seat a juror in a trial who referred to your client as an obscene body part?
I really have trouble giving you an answer, except that sounds
well,
like
then you would starve to death as a lawyer if you can't answer that question, Professor. How about if you were a prosecutor and one of the potential jurors referred to the police as terrorists who are going to bring the country down? Would you seat that juror in a criminal prosecution if you were the prosecutor?
I wish I saw the connection here, but that's...
I'll give you the connection. Lois Lerner just referred to conservatives as an obscene body part, and she said we were crazies and likened us to terrorists. Would you agree to let our fellow citizens decide whether or not there should be a special prosecutor?
You mean by poll?
However,
no,
we elect presidents
tell the Department of Justice what laws to enforce.
So you see no potential conflict of interest. You don't think this is an extraordinary fact pattern, and you don't trust your fellow citizens to make the call.
So former IRS officials sent emails describing conservatives as whacks, crazies, and a term for an orifice that's not used for speaking. This isn't unusual. I use the same language when describing Lou Dobbs. However, it's disturbing because it's coming from Lois Lerner, who's at the center of the IRS targeting scandal. The emails show the malicious intent of a flack whose office targeted political speech that their boss didn't like. The IRS, in a sense, became President Obama's goon squad, and Lois commanded the goons. She's a Batman villain, and her one and only power was political coercion. So what's next? How about a media that cares? Seriously, this was no accident. It was planned, encouraged, carried out, then covered up with a lame investigation and a premeditated apology. And when it started going really bad, the IRS told Congress that 8 workers involved in the investigation all had computer crashes, losing scads of data. Now, from an odds perspective, that's like getting hit by a meteor while you win the Powerball with a unicorn strapped to your back. It's like catching Dana smoking a joint and Eric not tanning. It never happens. But lucky for Obama, the patron saint of sweaty left-wing hacks, his media minions are all in the same boat, rowing for O. It's got to be weird being a reporter and seeing the movie All the President's Men on TV and knowing that you're one of the men. And maybe men is the wrong term. Cowards seems more fitting.